My name is Grace Whitfield. I'm 28 years old and the last thing my mother ever called me in public was a defect. She said it at my sister's wedding in a stone ballroom, with 200 guests, while I stood there holding a glass of champagne I never asked for. Why is this defect here? 9 years of silence. And that was her opening line. My sister turned from her photographer, saw my face, and smiled the way you smile at a stain on a rented tablecloth. You are not invited. She was right about that. She just didn't know who was. My family had 9 years to learn who I'd become, and they spent those years pretending I was never born. What the groom did next ended more than the evening. It brought down a dynasty 3 generations in the making, and I never raised my voice once. But this story doesn't start in that ballroom. It starts 10 years earlier, at a country club, with a graduation gown, and a wall of framed diplomas that held one empty frame. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet women finally tell the stories their families hoped would stay buried. If you've ever been made to feel like the smallest person at your own family's table, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. 3 weeks before the wedding, a cream envelope arrived at our house, thick as a dinner menu. It was addressed to Dr. Daniel Whitfield and Mrs. Grace Whitfield in calligraphy that cost more than my first month's rent at 19. Daniel's invitations usually mean hospital galas. I opened it with a butter knife, still thinking about payroll. Then I read the names. The Holston family requests the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son, Dr. Eric Holston, to Vivian Dixon. Vivian Dixon, my sister. I stood in my own kitchen and read her name 4 times, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into a stranger. The tile was cold under my feet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in another city, my family was planning a wedding, and an invitation with my married name on it had sailed straight through their defenses like a bird through an open window. Daniel came in, read it over my shoulder, and set his coffee down very carefully. You don't have to go. I know, I said. That's not the same as not wanting to. He didn't argue. He's a trauma surgeon. He knows the difference between a wound that needs stitches and one that needs air. We made rules together at the kitchen table like it was a board meeting. We would attend the ceremony, sit in the back, congratulate the groom, and leave before the family noticed the temperature drop. I even chose a navy dress, quiet as wallpaper. I thought I was walking in as a stranger with good manners. I was wrong about that in every direction, and the first crack showed up before I'd even finished my first glass of sparkling water. The estate sat on a hill of trimmed vines, all stone arches and chandeliers the size of bathtubs, valets in grey vests, a string quartet warming up under a pergola. My family always did know how to set a stage. Daniel got pulled into a circle of St. Anne's physicians near the bar, which suited me fine. I drifted toward the terrace with my wallpaper dress, and a champagne flute. A passing waiter had pressed on me, counting the minutes until the ceremony. That's when I heard my mother's voice for the first time in 9 years. It came from the other side of a stone column, bright and lacquered, her hostess voice. 2 families of physicians. Can you imagine the grandchildren? She was saying, and a woman laughed, and then my mother said the thing that took my breath like a door slammed on my hand. Vivian has always been remarkable. Our daughter, our only child, you understand. We poured everything into her. Our only child. I stood very still behind that column, the way you do when a wasp lands on your arm. I had prepared myself to be the estranged sister, the awkward footnote, the girl who left. I had not prepared to be erased. Erasure is tidier than hatred. It doesn't leave a body, just a blank space where a person used to stand. Somewhere in that crowd, my father was wearing a good suit and agreeing with everything. I looked down and realized the champagne in my glass was trembling, and I made my hand stop, because I had learned a long time ago that in front of these people, you never tremble. The quartet started a waltz. Behind me, coming closer through the crowd, was the voice that taught me that lesson. To explain what happened next, I have to show you the hallway I grew up in. In my parents' house, there is a wall. And on that wall hang 11 frames. My grandfather Chase's medical degree. My mother's cardiology board certification. My father's anesthesiology fellowship. Great-uncles, cousins. A century of Dixons and Chases in mahogany and glass. We called it the wall, capital W. The way other families say, the lake house. Sunday dinners had a liturgy. My mother would ask each of us what we had achieved that week, and the answers were graded like labs. Vivian, 4 years older than me, always had numbers ready. Class rank, test scores, science fair placements. She was the investment that performed. I was the other kind of child. I could splint a bird's wing and rebandage my grandmother's shin better than the visiting nurse. But I froze in academic competitions and brought home BS that landed on the table like spoiled fruit. My mother never screamed about it. Screaming was for families without standards. She simply adjusted my portion of her attention downward. The way you'd rebalance a portfolio. Looking back, I don't think she was cruel by her own lights. She truly believed the family name was collateral we all borrowed against, and that love was the interest you paid on it. Here's the detail I want you to keep, because it comes back at the end of this story. The summer I turned 14, a 12th frame appeared on the wall at the bottom below Vivian's Honor Society certificate. It was empty. When I asked my mother what it was for, she smiled like a loan officer and said it was mine. Pending. Now come to the country club 10 years ago, the week I graduated high school. My mother booked the garden room, which should have been my first warning because the garden room was for announcements, not celebrations. 22 relatives, white tablecloths, a printed menu. I wore a yellow dress I'd bought with my own money from the pharmacy job, and I remember feeling almost pretty until my aunt looked at me too long and said, "Well, aren't you brave with color?" My graduation was technically the occasion, but the evening had a second act nobody told me about. Between the salad and the entree, my mother stood, touched her glass, and announced that Vivian had been accepted to medical school, top choice, scholarship offer, the whole cathedral. The room rose like it had been rehearsed. My father proposed a toast to the next Dr. Dixon. Someone's husband started talking residency strategy. The waiter, bless him, quietly set my dessert down in front of me while everyone faced the other end of the table. And for a few minutes, I ate chocolate cake alone at my own graduation dinner, and told myself this was fine. This was just how the family worked. Vivian's news was genuinely bigger. I had my own plan, a certified nursing assistant course starting in September, then maybe nursing school on my own dime. I'd even printed the brochure. It was folded in my purse like contraband. Then my mother tapped her glass again, and said the sentence I can still hear in any quiet room. And of course, she said, warm as a scalpel. We should say something about Grace. Every face turned. My mother looked at me the way she looked at an X-ray and smiled. One daughter got the Dixon mind, my mother told 22 relatives, tilting her glass toward Vivian. The other got, well. She let the pause do its work. Pauses were her scalpel, too. An ugly high school grad is still a high school grad. We celebrate what there is to celebrate. A few people laughed the way people laugh at a boss's joke. Quick and hollow, eyes down. My aunt mouthed something sympathetic at me, which was somehow worse. I sat there with chocolate on my fork and 18 years of training in my spine, and I gave the garden room nothing. No tears, no exit, no scene to remember me by. I finished the cake. It tasted like drywall. Later that night, the family photographer's proofs went up on the mantel, and in the group shot from the club steps, I wasn't in the frame, not cropped out, composed out. My mother had arranged the rose herself. When I asked about it, she walked me to the wall, tapped the empty 12th frame with one manicured finger, and delivered the family motto like a diagnosis. In this family, love is earned. This frame is waiting. What you put in it is up to you. I said the frame could wait forever then, because I wasn't going to medical school. I said it quietly, but I said it. My mother looked at me for a long moment, and something behind her eyes closed like a till. Then it will hang empty, she said. And everyone who visits will know why. She went to bed. I stood in the hallway under a century of other people's achievements until the clock chimed and then the porch door creaked and a voice said, "Come sit with me, honey." My grandmother Ruth was sitting on the porch swing in her cardigan. 2 glasses of iced tea already poured because she always knew. She was my mother's mother, which surprises people. It surprised me too, once I was old enough to do the math on how a woman that warm produced a woman that cold. Ruth had been a nurse for 40 years. Night shifts, wound care, the unglamorous end of medicine, while her husband, the great Dr. Chase, collected the frames that started the wall. "Heard the toast, did you?" she said. It wasn't a question. I sat down, and the swing took my weight like it had been doing since I was 6. Then she did something she'd never done. She unbuckled the old steel watch from her wrist. The nurse's watch, the one with the sweep second hand she'd timed 1,000 pulses by. And she buckled it onto mine. It was still warm. 40 years I wore that, she said. It has seen more people through the worst night of their lives than everyone at that dinner combined. And this watch never once asked anyone their class rank. I laughed and cried at the same time, which is the only kind of crying she permitted on her porch. "Grace," she said. "Listen to me. Nobody earns love, honey." She stopped there, patted my hand, and looked out at the yard like the rest of the sentence lived somewhere in the dark. I'd hear the rest of it eventually, but not for 10 more years, and not from her mouth. 10 months after that porch swing, the watch was the only thing I owned that my family couldn't repossess, because 10 months later they threw me out. The college fund came first. $80,000 built since my christening meant for whichever school would have me. That spring, my father sat me down with a folder and explained in his mild anesthesiologist voice that the fund had been reallocated to Vivian's medical education. "An investment goes where the return is," my mother added from the doorway. Not unkindly, the way you'd read a weather report. I want to be fair here. I saw the storm coming, and I did prepare. I was 19. I had opened my own bank account the week after graduation, taken my documents out of my mother's filing cabinet, finished my CNA certification at night, and picked up shifts at a home care agency, wiping down walkers and helping strangers shower with dignity. I loved it, which was the unforgivable part. My mother could have survived a daughter who failed toward medicine. She could not survive one who succeeded toward the help. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday in April at the bottom of the stairs with my father studying his shoes. Quit the agency, retake the entrance exams, resume the family trajectory, or leave the family home. She used those words, family trajectory, like we were a spacecraft. I remember being calm. I had rehearsed for this without admitting it. I packed in 40 minutes. Clothes in 2 trash bags, my certification folder, Ruth's watch on my wrist. Nobody helped and nobody stopped me. At the front door, my mother said, "You're choosing to be nobody." And I said, "I'm choosing to be somebody you don't get to grade." And I carried my trash bags down the walk like luggage. The porch light went off before I reached the sidewalk. 9 years later, my mother would stand in a stone hallway and offer me that door back on one condition. But first, she had to call me a defect in front of 200 people. Which brings us back to the ballroom, the champagne I never asked for, and my mother's opening line. "Why is this defect here?" She said it low, the way surgeons swear, precise, contained, meant only for the sterile field. Up close, she looked expensive and tired. 9 years had silvered her hair and sharpened everything else. Vivian arrived a second later in a cloud of tulle and panic, bouquet gripped like a weapon. "You are not invited," she hissed. "Whatever this is, whatever you want, you will not do this today." I said, "Congratulations." I meant it mostly, which annoyed her more than anything else I could have engineered. Guests were beginning to angle toward us the way iron filings find a magnet, and my mother felt it before I did. She was always exquisitely tuned to an audience. Her face reorganized itself into hostess warmth. "We'll speak somewhere quieter," she announced for the benefit of a passing couple, and gestured toward a side room, as if she were offering me a tour. The wedding coordinator materialized, sensing weather. Vivian peeled away toward her photographer, with one last look that promised consequences. And I went along to the side room, calm as a Sunday, because here is what my family did not understand yet. I had spent 9 years learning exactly how much their theater could and could not do to me. They thought they were removing a problem before the Holstons noticed. In fact, they were marching me across a ballroom that held my husband, my work, and one person who knew precisely who I was. And every step they made me take was a step toward the moment the whole stage came down. The side room smelled like lilies and floor wax. My father was already there, which told me the play had been cast before the curtain. Raymond Dixon, 61 years old, a man who had spent 4 decades putting people to sleep, and 1 decade doing it to himself. For 9 years, I had told myself a small bedtime story about my father, that he was the gentle one, the hostage, that somewhere under the good suit, he had missed me. He looked at me now, first time since the trash bags, and here is the whole of what he said: "Use the kitchen door. There's a service corridor behind the kitchen. Don't make your mother repeat herself. Not how are you. Not you look well. Not even my name." I waited for the rest. The flicker. The folded $20 bill of affection he might slip me when she wasn't looking. Nothing came. And I finally understood something it had taken me 9 years and 1 sentence to learn. His silence had never been a hostage silence. It was a shareholder's. He had voted with her at every meeting. He'd simply let her read the minutes. Something in my chest that had been propped open since I was 19 quietly shut. And it didn't even hurt the way I'd budgeted for. "No," I said. He blinked. "No." As if the word were new to him, and in that house, maybe it was. "I came through this family's front door once already with everything I owned in trash bags," I said. "I will never again leave anywhere through the back." My phone buzzed against my hip. A text from Daniel, 3 rooms away, oblivious and about to be extremely relevant. "Eric's asking where you went. He wants to introduce you to his mother." The groom can wait a moment because the 9 years come first, and the 9 years started with night shifts. My first client after they threw me out was a retired machinist named Mr. Alger, 84, hands like tree roots. A man who had rebuilt engines his whole life, and now couldn't manage a shirt button. The agency paid me $11 an hour to be his hands. I learned to shave a face that flinched, to time medications by Ruth's watch, to listen to the same war story with fresh attention because for him it was fresh every night. My family called this work wiping strangers. Here's what it actually was. I held a man's dignity in my 2 hands for 8 hours a night, and I never once dropped it. Try that with a scalpel. I slept in a studio apartment above a laundromat, and kept a spiral notebook of everything the agency did wrong. Missed handoffs, double-booked aides, families left waiting by a phone that rang out. Not out of spite, out of the same instinct that made me rebandage my grandmother's shin as a kid. When care is done badly, my hands itch. I learned more about dignity from a man who couldn't button his shirt than from 3 generations of framed diplomas. And I learned something else, too, something the wall never taught anyone. The medical world my family ruled from operating rooms actually runs at the street level on people like me. Hospitals can't discharge without us. Doctors' own mothers need us. It is a whole economy of showing up. I was 19, then 20, then 22, saving every spare dollar in a coffee can like a depression grandmother. And then the fall I turned 23, my actual grandmother's phone went silent. Ruth had a stroke on a Thursday in October, the fall I was 23. I found out 2 days late from her neighbor because no one in my family called me. By then she was in a hospice with visiting hours and a visitor list, and the list was managed by her medical power of attorney, my mother. I did everything a person can lawfully do. I called the front desk daily. I sent my name in writing. I drove 2.5 hours on my day off and stood at the reception counter in my scrubs while a kind woman with terrible news in her eyes checked a clipboard and said, "Immediate family only, and I'm sorry, but you're not on the list." I was her granddaughter. I was also on paper nobody. And paper was my mother's home field. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time, close enough to see which window might be hers. 11 days later, Ruth died. I learned about the funeral from the same neighbor after it was over. There is a specific kind of quiet that follows a grief you weren't permitted to attend. It moves into your apartment and pays no rent. But Ruth, being Ruth, had gotten one thing past the clipboard. A week before the stroke, she had left me a voicemail. 41 seconds long. I know it's 41 seconds because the screen says so, not because I'd ever heard it end. I pressed play the night I learned she was gone. Got 12 seconds in. "Gracie, it's your grandmother. Don't you dare delete this." And my thumb hit stop like a reflex, because her voice was alive and I wasn't ready for the past tense. I kept that voicemail for 5 years. 5 years, and I never once let it finish. Grief either buries you or it pours a foundation. 6 months after we lost Ruth, I took $12,000 out of the coffee can and the credit union, rented a 2-room office that shared a wall with a dance studio, and started my own home care agency. I named it Brightwater for no family reason at all. I just wanted a name that sounded like the opposite of a hallway full of frames. My hiring policy was 1 sentence long: hire the ones who show up. I took the notebook of everything my old agency did wrong and turned every line into a rule. Aides got real wages and backup coverage. Families got a call back within the hour, every hour I was awake. My first contract was a small one, a hospital discharge planner, who was desperate on a Friday afternoon and out of options, which is the only way anyone gives a 23-year-old a chance. We didn't lose a client for 2 years. Word travels fast in the showing up economy. 5 years later, Brightwater had 340 caregivers across 3 states, and I had a title I still can't say without hearing my own younger self laugh: founder and president. If you're watching this while you build something of your own in a 2-room office somewhere, while everyone who shares your last name calls it a phase, I want you to pause and hear me say it plainly: the people who wouldn't give you a seat are not the audience you're building for. Subscribe if you want the rest of this story, because the next phone call changed my name. One Tuesday, a hospital called about a patient nobody else would take. And the doctor on the line had a voice I'd end up hearing every morning for the rest of my life. Back at the estate, I didn't go to the kitchen door, and I didn't go back to the ballroom. Not yet. I found the rock garden behind the terrace where the caterer's clatter faded into hedges, and I sat on a cold stone bench in my navy dress with my phone in my hand. You already know what file I opened. Grandma Ruth. 41 seconds. Saved through 5 phone upgrades. Backed up in 3 places. Listened to 100 times and finished exactly never. I pressed play. Gracie, it's your grandmother. Don't you dare delete this. Her voice papery and amused, the porch swing practically audible behind it. 12 seconds in, right on schedule. And I need you to hear this, honey, because nobody ever told your mother. Stop. My thumb, that coward, that loyal bodyguard. I sat there with my pulse ticking against Ruth's watch and her sentence cut off in the middle, the way it had been cut off for 5 years, and I asked myself what I was actually doing at this wedding. I could dodge the family, slip out after cake, keep the peace at a party I had every legal right to attend, or I could sit where my name card said I sat in a room they'd built on my erasure, and let whatever was true be true in public. Ruth went through that family's front door her whole life in a nurse's cardigan, and she never once apologized for the uniform. I put the phone away. I clasped the watch tighter. Then I stood up, smoothed the wallpaper dress, and walked back toward the music, toward the ceremony, the seating chart, and the 41 seconds I still owed my grandmother. Whatever her sentence ended with, I was done hearing it from behind a column. Now, the Tuesday phone call. 4 years ago, St. Anne's Regional had a patient no agency would touch, a retired teacher with a spine injury, a complicated house, and a family lawyer on speed dial. The surgeon himself got on the line, which never happens, and asked if Brightwater was as good as its reputation, or just newer than everyone else's. I said, both, and he laughed once, like a door unsticking, and said, come prove it. He was expecting a sales rep with a folder. What walked in was a founder with rolled-up sleeves who had personally done every job on the care plan. Dr. Daniel Whitfield, 32 at the time, the hospital's senior trauma surgeon, a man who wore authority the way Ruth wore her cardigan, without needing anyone to notice. We argued for 20 minutes about discharge protocols, and I won twice. He noticed the nurse's watch and asked whose it had been. Nobody in 8 years had asked that. Coffee from the vending machine turned into coffee from an actual cafe, which turned into 2 years of the calmest thing that had ever happened to me. He knew all of it before he proposed, the wall, the trash bags, the funeral I found out about late. He heard the whole inventory and said the sentence that closed the deal, you built a family business. The family part just came later. And it's me. We married in his mother's backyard when I was 26. 30 guests, a barbecue, Mr. Alger's granddaughter playing the fiddle. I took his name gladly. Dixon had only ever been a debt. But 2 weeks before that backyard wedding, I did one last old-fashioned thing. I mailed an invitation to my parents' house. You can probably guess what happened. You'd only be half right. The envelope came back 13 days later. And here's the half you might not guess, it wasn't marked return to sender. It had been opened. Someone had slid it cleanly, read the invitation, my name, Daniel's name, the date, the backyard, then resealed it in a fresh envelope, addressed in my mother's surgical handwriting, and mailed it back like a rejected insurance claim. On the back of my own invitation, one line, blue ink, don't embarrass yourself. I stood at the mailbox so long the neighbor's sprinkler cycled twice. Daniel found me there and read it, and I watched a man, who reduces shattered pelvises for a living go very still. We could just be happy, he said finally, loudly. It's excellent revenge. I laughed and I married him and I was happy. I want that on the record. But I also kept the envelope. I put it in the cedar box with Ruth's watch's original band. And every December after that, I still mailed my parents a Christmas card. Plain ones, no photo, signed Grace. Never answered, never returned, just swallowed by the same mailbox that had spat back my wedding. Daniel never told me to stop. He just watched me do it each year with the expression he was reading a scan he doesn't like. I told myself the cards were closure, a habit, postage stamp charity. The truth is simpler, and I can say it now. Some part of me was still standing at the bottom of the wall, holding my achievements up toward the empty frame, waiting for someone to hang one. That part of me RSVP'd yes to my sister's wedding before the rest of me had finished reading the invitation. And that part of me was about to get an answer, the final one, from 3 people at once in front of 200 witnesses on the most expensive stage my family ever built. One more piece and then the dominoes are all standing. 2 years ago, St. Anne's came to Brightwater with a proposal. The hospital wanted to launch a geriatric medicine fellowship training young doctors to actually understand aging patients, and they needed a founding sponsor. The board expected me to negotiate the naming rights. That's what sponsors buy. I had